Hey there, welcome to another episode of The Cutting Room Floor. This is where we get to dig into a rabbit trail. We get to follow a rabbit trail from a recent message, and we get to explore a topic or an idea that maybe we just didn't get to in a recent message. We just finished up looking at Leviticus, the whole book of Leviticus, and the last little bit of this book ends with this call and this exhortation towards obedience. And as I said in the message, this is a tough topic to wrestle with because there's a lot of potential potholes on this road. There's a lot of potential pitfalls in how we unpack the message of obedience and where obedience fits in the Christian life. One of those is a topic or sort of a theological system that is really quite prevalent in North America, but it's really, really widespread in other parts of the world. And that's something called the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And I think looking at a passage like we did from Leviticus 26, where it talks about the importance of obedience and the promise of blessing, this is a passage that can be used in a lot of these health, wealth, prosperity circles to support this ideology. So, what is the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel? This is a belief that God's greatest desire is to provide material blessing for his people. And the way that you get that material blessing is usually through some form of obedience. In other words, it says if you do these certain things, then God will bless that and he will provide an abundance of material wealth and riches for you. And usually that obedience is linked to financial giving and other spiritual practices like prayer and word of faith, claiming something in faith. So in other words, you'll see these preachers on TV all the time. They write best-selling books. Their names, like Joel Osteen, is probably one of the most well-known in North America anyways. They will write books, and there's others too that you can come into. Televangelists, there's some of them that are really quite well-known, and they've made quite a name for themselves. But their approach is if you pray and if you claim it in faith and if you give seed money or you give a certain amount of, a faith pledge or a faith gift, then God is going to multiply that to you and God is going to pour out an abundance of blessing upon you. That is a very, very appealing promise and a very appealing message because it guarantees, or at least it purports to guarantee for you a pathway towards wealth. And when you look at the people who present these messages, when you look at the people who preach this, it's hard not to be attracted to that message because usually the people that make these sorts of promises are incredibly wealthy. They actually fly around on private jets and they drive very expensive cars and they live in multi-million-dollar homes and they wear Armani suits and they're incredibly wealthy. And so it's hard not to look at that and say, well, it works because these people have claimed the blessings of God and their faith must be so strong, and maybe my faith isn't quite as strong enough, but it's not quite as strong, but maybe it can get just a little bit of that blessing. And so people then will participate and they'll send in their money and they'll send in their pledge cards and all in the hope of securing huge amounts of material wealth for themselves. One of the greatest problems of the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel is that it has made massive inroads into other parts of the world. I was in Africa a couple of years ago, and I was in one of the poorest countries in Africa, and the moment I stepped off the plane, literally, 50 yards from the foot of the stairs off the airplane, in the reception area where you start to get processed to come into the country, there were big television screens on the wall, and there were preachers preaching this health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And it turns out that message had proliferated this country. And no wonder, this was a very impoverished country, and so people were hoping and clinging to anything that might offer the way of deliverance from the poverty that they were experiencing. And I think that is such a tragedy, because what that says is, if you believe in God, then God's going to make sure that you don't get sick, and he's going to make sure that the crops thrive, and he's going to make sure that your animals do okay, and then ultimately you'll be able to get pulled out of the poverty that you're experiencing. And it's in other countries as well. The great tragedy of health, wealth, and prosperity is that it replaces the giver with the gift. In other words, it says that obedience is a way to gain more of the gift for yourself. And so God inadvertently, it's not intentional, gets sort of pushed out of the picture. God gets pushed out of the way, because what people really begin to hunger after is what God can give. So people learn then to treasure the gift more than the giver, rather than obeying God in order to delight in God, rather than obeying God in order to get more of God, you might say, to experience his love more, to experience what it is to trust in him and to see his faithfulness in your life, rather than obeying God because you want to simply delight in God and delight in doing his will. Health, wealth, prosperity says obey God because of what God can do for you. And in that sense, obedience to God really becomes a means to self. It becomes a means towards serving your own needs and your own wants and your own desires. And that's not what the gospel is all about. That's not what obedience is about in the Christian life. Obedience in the Christian life is meant to be about doing God's will for the sake of God, for who he is, and for what he, as a response of gratitude to what God has done. So I want to really just encourage you, especially those of you that maybe you watch preachers on TV, maybe you read some of the best-selling books that come out, and it's very, again, it's quite popular and common in North America. I really would encourage you to be alert to this. Anytime we are being encouraged to obey God for what God can do for us, we really need to be on high alert that we have not replaced the gospel with an idol. We have to really be very, very concerned that we haven't put a substitute in place of God. Obedience to God matters, but it matters as a way of seeking after God and delighting in him. I'll close with the story that I heard. It's a story about a king who had two servants, and the one servant really appreciated and admired and respected the king. He wasn't a very wealthy person, but he planted a garden, and the garden grew, and the carrots were really good that year. And so the servant, he harvests the crop, and he finds the very best of his crop. He finds this carrot that is like, really good carrot. It's, nice and bright and orange and healthy and all the rest of it. And so the servant takes the carrot to the king and says, "Oh, king, you are such a good and gracious ruler. You're such a good king. And I want to give you this small token as a show of my appreciation and my love for you." And so he gives the king the carrot. And the king is just floored because he sees it for what he is. He sees it for what it is. He sees it as an expression of thanks and gratitude. And so he says to the servant, he says, "Wow, because you have done this, because you've shown me your love and your kindness and your appreciation with this gift, I'm gonna give you a huge plot of land. I'm gonna give you more land so that you can take and cultivate the land and do with it what you will, as a show of my thanks to you." And so he gives the servant this huge extra plot of land. Well, the second servant is overhearing that, and he sees all this unfold, and the second servant, he doesn't raise carrots, but he actually raises horses. And he thinks to himself, he sort of does the math in his head and says, "Wow, if you give the king a carrot and he gives you like another 100 acres of land, like imagine what you would get for a horse." And so right away that servant goes home, and he goes and finds one of his horses, and takes it, leads it the next day back to the king, and he says, "Oh, king, you're a very good king, you're a very nice king." Kind of skips through that part really fast, and he says, "Here's a gift. I want to give you a gift as a show of my love and support and appreciation for you. I want to give you this horse." And the king just takes it and says, "Okay, well, thank you. That's it." And the second servant is kind of like, he's kind of waiting for the big gift that he thought was coming, and it's not coming. And the king notices his face, and the king kind of knows what's going on and says, well, what's the matter? And the servant's like, well, he doesn't want to say it, but the king finally comes out and says, look, I know what happened. You saw what I gave the other king, but what I gave the other servant, and you were expecting something similar. You were expecting actually something greater. But what you don't understand, O servant, is that the first king was giving me the carrot, but you were giving yourself the horse. A story from Tim Keller, I can't take credit for it, but it actually captures the difference between health, wealth, and prosperity, which says, I give in order to get more, and true gospel obedience, which says, I give and I'm obedient because I delight in God. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.